advocates for dignity and try and help people.
But Washington says Turkey failed to present any evidence. Mr. Khashoggi-style detention.
Attempt really to destroy democracy. I condemned it and I still condemn it. I condemned it and I still condemn it.
Well, it's now time for our third guest, Dr. Olga Oleinikova. She's currently Senior Lecturer and Director of the Social Impact Technologies and Democracy Research Hub at the University of Technology in Sydney. She's a Ukrainian and named by Forbes as among the top 40 global Ukrainians. And most significantly for us, the author of Achiever or Survivor, Life Strategies of Migrants from Crisis Regimes. Dr. Oleinikova.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, so I can see my slides. Thank you so much. It's an honor actually to be here tonight, and I'm really grateful for every opportunity that I get to talk about Ukraine. Before jumping into, we can leave on this slide. So today I'll talk about Ukraine. I'll talk about refugee crisis. I'll talk about humanitarian crisis. I will also, blend in some personal stories from people whom we have supported who are fleeing the war. So this presentation will be very combined, I would call it, very personal. Plus, of course, you'll hear some analytics, some statistics, but this topic is very personal for me. As was mentioned by the host, right? So I'm Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine, in Kiev, and I came to Australia in 2012 to do my PhD at the University of Sydney. Now this is a short intro to me. So now I'm a senior lecturer at University of Technology, Sydney. And my main areas of research are into democracy, into diaspora, into migration, specifically from Eastern Europe into Australia. When I say Eastern Europe, I look mostly into, of course, Ukrainian migration to Australia, but I'm also looking into Czech and Hungarian migration to Australia too. One of my core works lie within the SITADHub, which was mentioned as well, which is a social impact technologies and democracy research hub. This hub is a networked research center, which is built by a group of scholars, but now we have more than 117 associates across different countries, and they all are working together on similar topics around democracy in Eastern Europe and democratic transitions in Eastern Europe. Can we go to another slide? So today I decided to start with this image. I'm sure you've seen a lot of images of Ukrainian towns, and Ukrainian war across media. There was plenty of content recently released, right, across various sources. So this is an image from Borodyanka. It's a small town which is located next to Kiev, and it has severely suffered from war, right, from Russian invasion into Ukraine, which started in February this year. So this actually image is very symbolic because you can see the monument of the Ukrainian writer and poet Taras Shevchenko, who is like one of the icon of Ukrainian literature, and he's facing basically the whole destruction, right, which we're all witnessing now across Ukraine. So as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has abruptly transformed, right, the whole world, right? It didn't just touch Ukraine, but it transformed the whole world. Millions of people have already fled. A new Iron Curtain is grinding into place, and economic war deepens. We see more civil casualties. We see a lot of destroyed cities. The infrastructure has suffered significantly from the war in Ukraine. so this image shows the destruction around Kiev, which happened at the end, which was happening during March and April, but at the end of April Russian troops left the Kiev surroundings, and they relocated and concentrated in eastern Ukraine for the final and big battles, so probably to capture the east south of Ukraine and to occupy those territories. But major destructions have happened not just around Kiev. So Kiev is one of, lucky towns, we can call it, because Russians didn't enter the city itself. It's incomparable, of course, to what is happening in Mariupol and what we're witnessing in Kharkiv, the massive destruction of everything, infrastructure, food shortages, and water shortages. When I think about Kiev as well, I can relate to my grandparents. As I mentioned, I'm from Kiev, so I have still my family in Kiev, in Ukraine. So my grandparents were 85. They actually was surviving the first very harsh months in central Kiev apartment, just thanks to volunteers, to the food that was provided by volunteers, to the medication that was provided by volunteers. Otherwise, it would be super hard for them, to maintain even like the basic living survival needs, right? Even food and medication. And for old people, it matters a lot. So Kiev hasn't seen the worst. What we're going to see is, and what we're seeing more is in eastern Ukraine, in Mariupol and Kharkiv. We're facing a huge humanitarian crisis at the moment, and we can go to another slide. So humanitarian crisis is just evolving very rapidly in Ukraine. Human costs of war is severe. A quarter of population have left their homes. So around 5.5 million refugees have fled the country, and further 7.1 million people have been internally displaced. So it's UN Refugee Agency stats, but we can imagine that these numbers are much higher. I actually yesterday checked some of the latest, and I saw the number of 12 million of people who actually fled the country. So I think we'll see more precise data as the war evolves, and we'll see more shocking numbers, I think, in the next even months. We're also witnessing, like, part of the humanitarian crisis is that, of course, mentioned shortage of food, of water. Humanitarian crisis actually is happening not just in the Ukrainian mainland, but it's happening as well in territories which are controlled by Russia, like DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, and LNR. I have some family friends there, so I talk to both sides, and from what I heard lastly is that they barely have water in Donetsk. So, people have to queue for hours in the communal, water pump station where they get the pumped water from the ground, but they really don't have water. So humanitarian crisis is really, touching not just Ukraine controlled territories which are under Russian invasion, but it's also Russian controlled territories are under, severe crisis, and it's evolving very, very quickly. Experts say that this humanitarian crisis is evolving at a very rapid speed. So they haven't seen such rapidly evolvement of crisis since Yugoslav war in the 1990s. So it's the first kind of such crisis since those times. So the scale is really big and impressive in a horrible sense. If we go to the next slide, of course, when we talk about humanitarian crisis, we talk about refugee crisis. So I mentioned that, people are fleeing Ukraine. Though, actually, I should mention that I think in the middle of April or closer to the end, there was one day when the in-migration basically outnumbered the out-migration from Ukraine. So people were returning, started to return, especially to Kiev, since Russian troops left Kiev and surroundings and relocated. So many people are going back now to Kiev. But still, people are leaving, people are going far. So we'll see, we'll watch the dynamics, and it's really, changing every day. When we talk about refugee crisis and escalation of refugee crisis, here it's important to talk about children and women. So some figures say that an estimated 55 children are forced to flee the country every minute. So so children and mothers, that's the group that is leaving Ukraine, because guys and men under 60, between 18 and 60, they can't leave Ukraine because they're forbidden to leave Ukraine because they are in the mobilization age, right? So they can be called to the front anytime. So they are forbidden. For them, it's forbidden to leave the country. So those who are fleeing, the refugees from Ukraine, it's mostly women with children and older generations, right? Parents of those who already live, let's say, migrants in other countries, in Western countries specifically. So it's most vulnerable groups that are actually leaving Ukraine at the moment. And when we talk about destinations, of course, we talk about the bordering states of Ukraine. We talk about Poland. We talk about Slovakia, Moldova, Hungary, and Romania. Czech Republic as well. We don't share border, but Czech Republic is as well quite popular with refugees from Ukraine. All of these Western countries, and here we can say Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, they introduced temporary protection for Ukrainians. So what is temporary protection? It actually varies. The rules vary across different countries, but for example, Poland and neighboring countries, they give temporary protection with a limited time, let's say for a year, with extension. Right, the same is happening in Norway, I think, and in other countries. When we look into Australia, because I'm based in Australia and I'm closely following, the wave of refugees from Ukraine into Australia. Australia has, adopted a little bit different strategy. So they opened very quickly the borders for temporary arrivals through tourist visas. So Ukrainians were really easily getting visa 600 to come to Australia as a tourism. Of course, they give priority to those who have family, who have, kids or have parents here. So for them, it was very easy to obtain visa with limited documents. I heard the stories that people didn't even need to provide, even passport, or if you're traveling with kids, you could even, not show any documents for kids. So actually, Australia simplified the system so much to open it up for Ukrainians so they can flee. So they offer a temporary solution. After that, what Australia did, they offer now a 786 visa. It's a humanitarian visa, which gives access to work, study, and Medicare, but it's just humanitarian protection given for just 3 years. So we'll see how Australia will treat, and we talked about Afghanistan just before, right? So there's a huge debate, how Australia treated Afghanistan refugees recently and how they're treating Ukrainian refugees, right? Touching on racial issues and on, how Australia is responding differently to different, conflicts and war situations. And it's another very big and interesting topic. If we go to another slide, so here are just some stats which I just given, right? Here I want to focus now and share just some personal stories, which gives you the actual understanding of what is happening on the ground. How I know the stories is because as the war started with SITADHub, with our center, right, we established a small fund to collect money for relocation costs. To cover relocation costs for Ukrainian refugees, because they experience huge problems with money for travel, for accommodation in the host countries, with visa applications, with translation of documents. So we created this fund to collect money and support those who are fleeing the war. And in the first week of a war, there was lack of such resources. Now there's many, there's Red Cross, there is this UN, there's lots of stuff available for refugees. But when it just started, when people were just massively fleeing and they needed support and money, so we started that fund very quickly. We have 10 volunteers on the ground in Ukraine who were assisting people, and we were sending money to them so they can cover their relocation costs. So I just want to share some of the stories of people whom we helped and their family. So I'll just read out some stories so you a flavor of actually what is happening in Ukraine. So Vita, and it will be female stories, right? Because as I mentioned, it's mostly female and kids who are living in Ukraine at the moment. So Vita's husband joined army on 26th of February. Vita grabbed the children, so she has two kids, in the very first days of the war and stood with them in the frost for a day at Medica. It's a pedestrian crossing to cross the border. So people were queuing there for hours in frost, and February was quite cold months in Ukraine. So the youngest son has contracted bronchitis, and he's still fighting the complications, but recovering fast. So she's a great mom. She's doing her best for the family. That's one story. Oksana, another mom, stayed with her daughter in Zhytomyr. So she's still staying in Zhytomyr. She volunteers and isn't always at home when an air alarm goes off. Oksana every time prays and calls her daughter Sofika to remind her that the little one, and she has another as well, kid, doesn't need to run into the hallway. Even if Murzik, they have a cat, even if Murzik runs into the kitchen. So her husband serves in Territorialna Oborona. It's not the official. It's not the official military, not the official army, right? That is serving across the country, but it's territorial oborona. It's civilian gatherings, right, of guys who want to protect their, their like local suburbs, the infrastructure, and so on in cities. So he joined that. So she's a wonderful mom. Katya, another story, works in Poland now on two jobs. She washes dishes in the local coffee shop and she washes floors in the clinic next to her house. But her twins have their own room again, and she's a great mom. She's doing her best. Marina, another one, doesn't go to work. She sits, she's now located in Germany. She sits on social payments. So she received the social payments. She lives in a room in the house of a very strict Frau Fehrbach, and this granny doesn't bake cakes like Marinchina's mom, and often makes remarks to her 4-year-old son, Matvey. Matvey then hides in the closet and complains to his grandmother Nelly by the phone. So Marina is a wonderful mom as well. Another story, Lesa posts beautiful photos of her new home every day. Now she's not in Kharkiv, but she's in Prague. Lesa does bright nails and buys new items for her 3 children and blogs and engages with her Instagram followers. Lesa says she will not return to Kharkiv because her youngest son still has anorexia, so he developed, he started to pee at night, and he can't stop doing that. So because of the shock and because of the alarms, so this condition hasn't stopped when they were rushing to leave the native town to escape bombs. So she's as well a wonderful mom. Another story, Anya stays in Poltava. It takes her a lot of effort to perform basic motherly duties, preparing food for her daughter. Her husband is missing. Her 12-year-old Sophie Salamika often herself goes to the store and actually buys groceries and helps to cook. So her mom sits in the kitchen for hours, and she can hear, her crying almost every night. But Anya is a great mom too. And the last story, Ira couldn't. So this is a family member of one of our person whom we helped to relocate, but that's their stories from the family. So Ira couldn't believe in the scale of trouble and didn't evacuate from Mariupol. She was buried in a brotherly grave, and her son Miron was saved by a neighbor. It's a miracle that her neighbor herself is still alive, as Ira was giving her her last meals to at least have some food. So a neighbor and a kid were evacuated a few weeks ago, and Ira is a great mom, or was a great mom. And the neighbor now is the new mom for the kids. The neighbor is actually a girl who's just 21 years old, who now is performing mom's duty for the girl. So that's just some stories of very diverse stories, very different stories of those who stayed in Ukraine and those who fled successfully. But being a mom, being a wife, and being a kid in war is very tough. Hopefully the situation will evolve and will change for better, and hopefully we can see the war end soon. But so far, that's the situation in Ukraine. And yeah, I think I'll stop here. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope I shed some light on what is happening in Ukraine at the moment.
Olga Oleinikova, thank you so much for that. If there's one question I could ask you, you're
Yeah.
sitting here, you're watching events half a
Mm.
world away. You can't do anything about the geopolitics of the situation that will unfold as it unfolds. So the one thing you can affect is what is something about what's happening here or our response. If there's one thing that sort of
Mm.
makes you mad or wants you to get excited about, why can't you do this? What is it? What would you say to the Australian government or Australian people that are viewing this, or any people around the world away from that situation, about what they
Yeah.
can do?
Yeah. So there's a lot of guides shared across social media what you can do. Like speak to your MP, local MP. Asking them to put some pressure, on Australian government and provide more support, various support, with medication, with humanitarian support, with weapons, with whatever can be done. That's one of the core advices, of course, to help refugees who are here. It's a diverse group of people, right? So we need to understand there are people who are really thankful for everything. There are people who don't know how to thank, so it's a very diverse group of people whom can end up in conflict situations here or there. But please be patient. I think for all Australians, for everyone, people with suffering very significantly, some have nervous breakdown, and they sometimes can forget to say thank you, or something like that. But I think being patient and being accepting, I think one of the most important, and empathetic, right? Empathic, yeah, that would be the right word, would be one of the core things I think that Ukrainians need now, especially those who are far away from home, far away from their husbands, far away from the normal life. And there's many, actually, I didn't mention that, but there's many people among those refugees who are looking forward to come back. Those who are in Germany, I talked to some in camps. They're staying in some camps and they're still waiting for documents to be processed, and they're saying, oh, we're just waiting to come back home, we don't want to stay. Like, and there's many people who don't want to stay. It's not their choice to go and stay in Germany. I'm pretty sure there'll be a big wave of return when it will happen. As well as I mentioned, in April, the number of in migrations back to Ukraine have outnumbered almost out migrations. So you'll see that we shouldn't be scared, in the West, I think, that, all Ukrainians will come and take your jobs, or, or present a competition, for, as like, some people would, say. I think many Ukrainians will come back home when there'll be such opportunity. Yeah. So I think
For
that's very
those,
brief.
yeah, for those non-Ukrainian Australians who want to help,
Mm.
are there local Ukrainian groups or associations that they can contact and say, look, where do I help? How can I help?
Yeah. There's lots of activism actually happening. So there is actually regular protests that are happening every week, in Sydney, to raise awareness, to keep the momentum going, because as we see as well in the news, the attention to Ukraine is dropping as well. So they try to, so you can join, or anyone can join this rallies that typically happen in the opera house, and you can go and meet some people, talk to them, and ask if they need something like accommodation or clothes, or baby stuff, like basic hygienic products and so on. We also have very active, there is the Federation of Ukrainian Organizations, who is very active body, that is an active body, and they've done a lot. Like, they created a database for all those who want to provide accommodation, so they're matching those who want to provide free accommodation with those who need this accommodation. So there's a lot of IT guys as well here, IT, Ukraine, there's a lot of IT engineers here in general in Australia, who came on permanent visas before the crisis, before the war, and they are helping a lot. So there's a lot of tools, how to match different people with different needs, and IT stuff, like web resources and so on. So Ukrainian community is doing really well here, and as you can see, I think the sign that Australia very quickly opened up, the 600 visas, now introducing the 786 visa, is because there is this pressure, right, of, Ukrainian trying their best to lobby, right, the interest of the group and to get support as much as they can. Of course, Australia is so far away. It's incomparable. The numbers that are coming to Australia, it's incomparable to what, Poland is experiencing, or, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic. It's incomparable, honestly. Yeah. So Australia will get what they say 6,000 visas they issued. But again, I know many people who actually got the visas, but they're not coming. Just because their plans have changed. They can go to Europe, or there's other options now. So even those who, there's no, it's not an indication of those who actually arrived. Yeah.
Olga Oleinikova, it's been great to hear from you. Thank you for sharing your stories and observations. And I guess we can all join you in saying glory to Ukraine.
Yes, thank you so much, John. Yes, thank you. Fingers crossed, it will end soon. Yeah.
It was terrible. I condemned the institute and I still